Hello friends, welcome back to my studio. Hope you're well. Here are some of the papers I've been making with my new plate. I haven't been fussed too much. I'm just really trying to break it in, playing around. I've got some of that graphite powder out, and this one has got the colours that I mentioned about Jackie Bernardi using in one of her vlogs. And yeah, different sorts of papers, just seeing how the paint pulls away from the plate. And I particularly love this one. That's with those two greens I mentioned last week. Oh, it's lovely. And I decided to try and draw with the graphite powder using, again, what I showed you last week in the art supplies vlog. And I managed to drop, as you'll see, a big splodge on the plate, and I haven't been able to get that graphite off as yet. It is coming off. It hasn't damaged the plate at all. I'll show you close up. It's just very much sitting there on the surface, very, very faintly. It's coming off a little bit on the more things that I create. I can see here it's got a little bit pulling off, so it's kind of the gift that keeps on giving. I might try and clean it off or try and pull it off properly with laying some paint on and leaving it overnight. But so far it's fine. I can print quite well with it still there. So yeah, this week I'd just like to show you how I'm finding this plate. If you've watched gel plate vlogs videos before, there's probably really nothing too much new to this. Playing around with those colours I showed you last week and the different papers I bought. This is the Japanese paper, and it's that mottled side. It's got a bit more of a rough side and a smooth side, and I've noticed the rough side is more porous and is pulling the paint off better. So that's really nice. You can see a little bit of the graphite there coming off. And I'm finding this plate really lovely. It's very easy to roll the paint out on compared to the homemade plate. And depending on the paper, it is also easier to pull a complete clean print. I was just using some of that pale green and wasn't showing up enough, so I decided to go with that other green, the green grey antique green that I've been loving. And even this heavy body paint, you can see it's quite easy to get it smoothed on. I find with the homemade plate, the paint with the roller will pull away as easy as it goes on, whereas this has just been so easy to spread the paint out. So I'm pretty sold on these plates. There are two versions, as far as I know of, that are made, a Jelly Arts and a Gel Press. The research I did suggested that the Gel Press was more favoured by other artists, so that's why I bought a Gel Press plate. And not having, of course, the Jelly Arts to compare it to, I'm very, very happy indeed with how it's going. And look at this tissue paper is just pulling all of the paint away, and a tiny bit of that graphite, which is actually quite lovely, that very subtle image of the graphite powder, just lovely. This is paper that I made ages ago with some acrylic ink on tissue paper. And so I just thought I'd have a play. This is really just about experimenting, getting the plate to accept particularly the fluid paint. It is beading a little bit still. It's just new. I've only really pulled a handful of images off this, so it is printing really well considering it is brand new. The instructions were not to do anything other than just straight away start to print with it, so that's what I'm going ahead and doing. And yeah, I've got some really lovely things happening. It was a little bit too subtle, so I go again with something that's a bit more in contrast with the yellow, that Titan Mars Pale, I think this is, with a little bit of the yellow blending in. This one turns out to be quite a nice print. And it is nice to be able to use the backs and fronts of the tissue paper. I think this is the wet strength tissue paper. And it already had that rip in it. And yeah, it's just some really lovely results that I'll be able to use in future projects. So here's a little bit more of that paper that I've used. The inks that I'm using there are Pearlescence, Daler Rowney Pearlescence, to make those papers. And one was a yellow ochre, and the other one was Permanence, I think is the colour. So a kind of bronzy, that's that bronzy colour you can see. And here you can see the difference between the fluid paint and the heavy body paint, that raw umber is really stuck in blobs and not spreading out very well at all. It's an older tube of the Matisse paint. Good for effects, not good if you want a good spread, but it turns out to be quite nice on this paper that's already got this ink on it. And so that fluid ink I used, I remembered I had left over when I was playing around with trying to do some faux encaustic look. And that's the Interference Blue by Golden that's giving that real shimmer. And I end up getting a little bit addicted to that and using it a lot in today's video that you'll see. And I had to say, okay, enough's enough, stop using that one and play with all the rest. Those fluid inks, you can see there, just so much comes out and it feels so wasteful. So if anyone's got a tip for me on how to not have all that waste once you screw the lid back tight, maybe I shouldn't be screwing the lids in a session and just leave them open. I'm sure the paint's not going to dry up in a session. Perhaps that's what to do. But yeah, I found a lot on the lid that felt very wasteful, because of course none of these things are cheap items. So I'm just printing here. That's the rollout page. I really love those pages where I'm rolling off, cleaning the roller. Love that subtlety in the mark. And these are all just old things that you may have seen me create in previous vlogs. And so I'm just going over again, just having a big experiment and play day, seeing what happens. That's more of that Interference Blue with some of that Atelier Permanent Alizarin that I showed you last week. I thought the pinky blue would go well together, and yeah, it does. It's great to have a day where you're not necessarily trying to come up with anything special at all. And when you have no attachment to the outcome, you can really get some really wonderful things. And if you film yourself while you're doing it, you've always got the record then of what you actually did, because it's always really hard to remember later what it was that got some, magnificent results. So I encourage you to film yourselves just for yourselves' sake. So see that shimmer that the interference is giving? Really lovely. And look at that subtle that's left on the plate there. So I'm just using some gloss medium to see if, so it won't add any colour to this. I'm keen to see if I can get just this pinky hue to pull off onto another page. I've no idea whether the gloss medium is what you should be using, but again, it's an experiment day. It's what I had on hand. I have got some matte medium with me as well, which I'll use. I found this to be really slippery. I couldn't rub at all, which is why I'm pressing. And I just love this with the yellow. As I said, I got quite addicted to using that interference blue. So this is some of that Matisse colour that I mix the Australian blue gum with the unbleached titanium, just that bit more muted, desaturated blue. And I just try and figure out what page I actually want to print it on. Another old print. And yeah, it's not really doing much, but I think I get something out of this page a little bit later on. I decided I quite like some of these marks, and because I'm printing over other papers that already have colour on them, I thought I would not try and cover the whole plate, but leave this kind of mottled feel, and yeah, it works really, really well. This paper here is some of that printmaking paper I mentioned that I found having a clean up in the studio. And I'd already had this red colour on, and so that's showing that pale pink over the top. That printmaking paper really took up the ink really strongly, really lovely. So of course it's a printmaking paper, so I would expect it to, but I didn't know how it would perform on the gel plate itself. So, you know, I've really liked that mottled effect, so I'm doing it again. So rather than lifting the roller and letting it spin and rolling it out, I'm keeping the roller kind of going and not lifting. So then it gives you that paint miss, and gives you that mottled thing, if that makes sense. Of course, I'm cutting out, because this is quite a long video, I'm obviously rubbing these a lot longer than I'm showing in the video. Look at that, isn't that lovely? So that's 2 or 3 layers on that now, and sometimes that's, you know, what and that beauty of a gel plate, that you can do that, is have layer upon layer. Another very old piece of paper. Again, not doing much yet, but you just keep going. You never know what the colours are going to do, how much is going to come off the plate. So it is lovely to just, that's what the gel plate printing can give you, I guess, is lovely surprises. And so here I'm just playing with how I'm rolling out the paint. It doesn't always have to be a complete cover. And so because I'd put the pinky colour on, I'm going over the green because they look great together. And it's so subtle, it's got those magenta colours in behind. This is the way I often use the gel plate, where I mask off the paper so it has a lovely border and it gives you a finished product, if you like. Of course, it needs to be done on a more heavy duty. You couldn't tape down tissue paper, of course. But yeah, look at that. Once it's got the border, I think that's actually quite nice. So this is this gold azo colour, Quin Nickel Azo Gold, and oh, it's glorious colour, that glow that it has. It's very unique. I really love the yellow nickel as well. So you see, even I've pulled all of those prints, it's still, the fluid is still beating on the plate, but that's okay. That will eventually work its way where it doesn't do that. And I thought I'd just kind of draw and see what happens. Unfortunately, not too much. But how are you going to know? So some of the Titan Mars Pale again over the top. I probably would have got more out of this if I had have let the Nickel Azo Gold dry. You can see that now that's quite mixed in. This is some wet strength tissue paper. And it's absolutely brilliant in lifting pretty much everything off the plate. So not what I was initially going for, but still a lovely piece of paper. So that's the heavy body paint, because I'm wanting again that mottled effect. Seeing what I can get, seeing as not too much came up with that besides the lovely background colour. I found you really don't need to rub that tissue paper much at all. It really does lift. Look how much it's sticking to the plate. It's really lifting off that paint. No worries at all. And I love it. Gorgeous. I'll be able to use that. I do like how the tissue paper crinkles and gives you those extra random marks as well. So more mottled, cloud-like mark making back over that blue image I had. And yeah, I love the depth you can get when you keep it really subtle like that. So here's all the papers that I had rolling out the brush, cleaning off the brush. I don't know if I can get anything. I always try and make something with these, but I haven't discovered a way yet. But here's all the papers I made. Excuse the mess, we are doing a little bit of shuffle in the studio. But join me next week for what I make with all of these papers. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely week, and I'll see you next week. Bye.